Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
George Melendez Wright was a brilliant young scientist with the National Park Service back in the 1920s and the 1930s. You could say he was ahead of his time in that he wanted the Park Service to take a holistic role in how wildlife in the parks was managed. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. While Wright tragically left the world too young when he was killed in a car crash in 1936, his name lives on today in the George Wright Society, a nonprofit organization that is focused on stewardship of parks, protected and conserved areas, cultural sites, and other kinds of place-based conservation. Our guest today is Dave Harmon, Executive Director of this society. We'll be back in a minute with Dave to learn more about this society and the role it plays.
Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for having me.
So, what can you tell me about the George Wright Society? I mean, what is its connection to the national parks?
George Wright Society has been around since 1980, and our mission is to help create and also help distribute the knowledge that underlies the functioning of all kinds of parks, protected areas, conserved areas, what we call place-based conservation, which is just a catch-all term for all these different places, special places, whether they are anything up from a historic house site all the way up to a place like Wrangell, St. Elias, that people value. So important and special places. And our connection to the National Park Service comes most directly through our name. We're named for George Melendez Wright. And George Melendez Wright, George Wright, was the first scientist to work with the National Park Service. He was active in the 20s and 30s. He helped organize and underwrote with his own funds the first wildlife survey in national parks, and really is considered to be the founder and the father of science in the U.S. National Park System and the National Park Service. So he was a really important figure in the history of the agency. And the founders of our group, George Wright Society, were both of them had held the title of what used to be called the chief scientist in the National Park Service. There was a title there's a person with that title in the National Park Service. Both of them felt that George Wright would be an inspiring figure to create an organization around that would support this mission about supporting and creating knowledge. And so they named it after him. The organization from the very beginning wasn't just about science, though. It included people like anthropologists and archaeologists. And so we're very much an interdisciplinary organization. And we do have a strong focus on the National Park Service. We've had a lot of members over the years from the National Park Service. The leadership of our board has included people who either were present Park Service people or retirees. But we also, from the beginning, we're not just focused on the National Park Service or even agencies here in the United States. We have an international presence. We do work through various international conservation organizations. So it's a very wide-ranging group, but it does have a National Park Service kind of core focus.
Now, correct me if my memory fails me, but George Wright, as you mentioned, was a young scientist with the Park Service and really stood out for the work that he did. And he lost his life too soon. I believe he and Roger Toll, another Park Service superintendent, I think, were down in Texas evaluating sites for possible inclusion to the national park system, and they were involved in an automobile accident.
That is absolutely right, Kurt. Your memory serves you correctly. Roger Toll at that time, I believe, was the superintendent at Yellowstone, and he was part of an international delegation that was in what is now the Big Bend National Park area. They were looking to potentially create an international park across the border. So there were Mexican colleagues with them on this mission, and George Wright spoke fluent Spanish. He has, of Hispanic heritage. And so he was down there with Toll and some other people, and they were actually on their way to Organ Pipe Cactus, or what is now Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in Arizona. They were traveling through New Mexico when there was a tragic automobile accident that caused Wright and Toll both to lose their lives, as well as the driver, a young driver of the car, who was involved with them in the crash. So it was a very dark day in the history of the National Park Service, because Toll was a relatively young man. He was older than Wright. I think Wright was only 31 when he died. He was a very young fellow.
Yeah.
But he was an up and comer for sure. And Toll was already a highly, well, they were both very well established in the agencies, but Toll was a highly respected person too. So yeah, that was a very difficult day.
It's interesting. I, from time to time, have stumbled across, George Wright and some of the work that he did. He did some really widespread wildlife studies, didn't he? Trying to direct the Park Service in how to deal with wildlife.
Yeah, he was one of the things that he's especially noted for was trying to steer the Park Service away from things like bear feeding shows, which were very common at the time in the 20s when he started out, where they would literally, take garbage and dump them in areas where they had bleachers, where people would sit and watch the bears come in to feed. Of course, that's anathema today. People can't even imagine that it would happen, but it was very commonplace, and Wright was really the key figure. He had a couple of people he worked with, a man named Ben Thompson and Joseph Dixon, who were working as a team, those three. And they were the core people who began to really steer the Park Service towards a much more scientific approach to wildlife and to basically everything having to do with nature in the national park. So, yeah, so they were pushing an ecological viewpoint, which the Park Service just simply didn't have. Yeah, and so they were key in, as I say, getting the Park Service to they got them on the path where they are today, where science and scientific knowledge is the core of natural resource management, and scholarship is the core of cultural resource management. So yeah, they were real game changers.
Yeah. I mean, you have to wonder how much further the Park Service would have progressed if they hadn't lost their lives back then. And it's interesting, I didn't realize that they were looking at a possible cross-boundary international park, kind of like we've got Glacier and Waterton Lakes up in Canada and Montana, and we'll see how that goes with a little animosity between the two countries currently. But
for sure,
back in the 1930s, that topic still comes up from time to time. I think it was wasn't FDR in the 1940s? Wasn't he a proponent of that as well?
I don't remember that exactly, but it wouldn't surprise me. My history on that would be a little fuzzy, but yeah, it was definitely a serious. I think he was supportive. I'm trying to remember what I'm going to name check Jerry Emery, a man who wrote a really good biography of George Melendez Wright. It came out a couple of years ago. I highly recommend it to all your listeners and readers. And I think Jerry has the whole story in there, but I think FDR was certainly supportive of the general concept. And I got to tell you, Kurt, we have in our archives, we have a really cool historical photo of them crossing the Rio Grande from Texas into Mexico in these vehicles from the 30s, and being sort of pulled through the river, and it's just amazing. That's, as you know, very rugged country down there, and they were all over it. They were mapping it and checking it out with their Mexican colleagues. And there's another famous picture of George Wright in this incredible leather flight suit with these big boots and goggles, standing in front of a biplane, and they were doing aerial surveys. He was going up in a biplane. And it's like Indiana Jones kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing.
And you just have to wonder if those hopes came to fruition. I mean, if there was a huge cross-boundary national park tying Mexico and the United States together, I mean, the landscape down there is phenomenal. The flora and the fauna, and we need bigger protected areas, bigger areas of conservation, because we're coming in on the 250th anniversary of the United States, and we're just left with a fraction of wildlands, and you can't keep squeezing them and expect nothing bad to happen.
Yeah, no, you're channeling George Wright when you say things like that.
In my wildest dreams. Now, getting back to the George Wright Society and what you guys do, do you fund research, or do you encourage research in all the ologies, quote unquote, that we have on federal lands?
No, we don't fund research. We don't conduct research. We literally exist to provide opportunities for people to share their research, and we encourage people to create new research. And the way we do that is there are two primary avenues that we work through. One is we publish a journal, which we do in conjunction with the University of California at Berkeley, a place called the Institute for Parks, People, and Biodiversity. This is an open access journal that we started about 5 years ago. It kind of picks up the mantle of a journal. It's called Parks Stewardship Forum, and it's an open access journal we publish 3 times a year. It kind of picks up the mantle of a journal that we published for many years before that called the George Wright Forum. And so it's in the same vein. But again, this one is an all digital journal. The older journal that I spoke of, the George Wright Forum, was mostly in print and then in digital. This one is entirely digital, like most journals are today. So that's a place where people can go and share literally almost anything to do with place-based conservation. We operate that journal on the basis of doing theme issues. So we've had theme issues on everything from indigenous co-stewardship to climate change strategies, reacting to climate change, the sort of history of the United States and how it's portrayed in national parks. We cover a wide range of stuff in the journal, and so it's open. Again, it's open access. If people want to Google it, or we can provide a URL at some point. It's a great thing you can go take a look at and just get an idea of the breadth of things that people are working on in our world of place-based conservation. So that's one avenue that we work on in terms of sharing information. The second one is that we bring together people in person, and we're just launching, upcoming in October, a new series of workshops that we're billing as conservation solutions workshops, and they're going to be called the George Wright Society Park Forum. And we're going to be holding our first park forum at the University of Montana in Missoula about third week of October. There's information about all this on our website, which is just georgewrightsociety.org, and people can go there and check out the beginnings of the program. But basically, again, it's a wide-ranging kind of workshop where we are looking at bringing together people to share information about these areas, across the board, and whatever people are working on. And so we're doing that, bringing people together that way, publishing a journal, and we have other programs too that we pursue that support students and their development, and so on and so forth. But yeah, we don't do any direct funding or research ourselves. We try to provide, I guess, scaffolding or the framework for others to successfully pursue those kind of things.
Yeah. Where can the general public find that park forum, the George Wright Forum journal?
The easiest way to do it would be if people want to check it all out, it's just go to georgewrightsociety.org, and then our front page, our homepage will have a link to the latest issue, and you click on that. That will take you to the journal's homepage. And then once you're there, you can browse to your heart's content, download anything you want. It's all there for free. It's all an open access publishing model that the University of California, our publishing partners, pursues along with us. And it's really fantastic because it provides information to anybody without any economic barriers, and that's the way it should be. Sharing information as widely as we can if we can do it. So if you go to our homepage, georgewrightsociety.org, you'll find out about that. You can find out about this workshop that I just mentioned. All of our other programs are right there. So
Yeah. Now, you guys are a nonprofit, right?
correct. Yes.
How do you survive? How do you keep the lights on? I mean,
We have memberships. We are a membership organization. And of course, we certainly welcome people who want to support us. And you can find all that stuff again on our website. It's all right there. We also do some fundraising through charitable foundations and donors, particularly for specific projects that we do. And we realize some income from the registration fees that we charge for our in-person events. But mostly we're dependent on the goodwill of memberships, our members and donors. And so we try to think of ourselves as a community of people who are supporters of national parks and other kinds of areas like that. And that we just basically appeal to people's sense of community and wanting to support us. And so, but we're not a large organization. We're very small. We just have myself. I'm the executive director here. That's my position. I'm the only full-time employee. I have a very valued colleague who also works here, who's a part-time employee, and we have a volunteer board who does a lot of work for us. And so we're a small group, but we try to punch above our weight. And so that's how we leverage all the money that we do get is through good works by volunteers.
yeah, that's great. The memberships, is it restricted to the scientific community, or can I sign up and become a member and do I get a hat or something?
Certainly can. No, we used to have really cool hats. Actually, we need to make those again. No, right now we don't give away any swag at the moment. You just have the good feeling inside of supporting a great cause and all that sort of thing. But no, anyone can join. It's open to anybody who's supportive of our goals, and we do have lots of just regular everyday park supporters who see the value in parks being operated according to the best information out there, and so that's what we rely on.
Great. So, Dave, you've been doing this for about as long as I've been doing The Traveler, 30 years or so. I have to ask, have you ever seen a more turbulent time with the National Park Service?
In all honesty, Kurt, no, I haven't. The sort of pace of what is coming out of the current administration and all the changes they wish to make and the fundamental operating structures of the federal government is something that I don't think anybody's experienced. And so this is a very challenging time for the National Park Service. And I also want to just point out, of course, all the kindred agencies that are there in the federal government, because we try to be supportive of them all, including places like the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and some of these are in different departments in the federal government. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which runs the National Marine Sanctuaries Program. We were involved with them as well. All of these agencies are undergoing the stresses that I think all of your listeners already know about through the daily headlines. And so, the short answer to your question is I don't think we've ever seen a turbulent time quite like this.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree that from time to time you have to take an analysis of your operation, of your organization, and see where there might be some replication, duplicities, wasteful spending. And it's one thing to come in and strategically look at that, but it's something totally different to what we've seen in the past 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right on the money. Self-examination is absolutely essential to the continued good functioning of any organization. Doesn't matter whether it's an agency or a nonprofit organization, your local community group, self-reflection and being willing to always, take a look and see if you can make things better. That's critical. And of course, in our system, I mean, we, have a very open, pluralistic, democratic system, and different ideologies are going to be competing for, what they consider to be the future, especially places like the national park system. And so then there's nothing wrong with that. What I would just say, from my own perspective, is it's important to do that in good faith, and not from a position where you're just assuming that a particular institution is irredeemably bad or needs to be destroyed because it doesn't fit a particular ideology. And that goes whether you're coming from a liberal ideology or conservative ideology, at least in my view. So yeah, to your point, it's important to look hard and to try to make sure that especially taxpayer dollars are well spent. That's critical. Now, from my perspective, again, the national park system is not the place to look to cut fat. The fundamental reality of the U.S. national park system is that it's been underfunded for decades. And my position is, and I think the George Wright Society, I think I could speak for the George Wright Society here, is that the U.S. national park system is a critical institution for both the character and the identity of the United States. It's really central. It's one of the central pillars of who we are as a country. And it's really important that Congress expresses the support. The American people always have supported the national park system. Every survey you ever read about, there's very strong support for it, right? And I think Congress needs to step up and make that support real with more funding. That's not been the case, and I'm not blaming that on any particular party. I mean, this is a failure, I think, of our whole system. It just hasn't stepped up for that. But right now, cutting the cuts that are being contemplated to the national park system, the National Park Service, the chaos that's been visited on the workforce there with the reductions in staff, the firings of probationary workers, the sort of retirements under duress. That's putting immense strain on a system that was not, fat to begin with. It didn't have the capacity to take those shocks, and so that's very difficult to watch. Colleagues have to go through that, and we in the George Wright Society support public lands and the especially the U.S. federal servants who are working on their behalf, and we want to make sure that those people are respected and that their work is respected, because it deserves respect. So, yeah, all of this adds up to a very, very tough time for us and for the causes that we love.
I don't know about the other land management agencies, but it's been said and it's been written that the Park Service budget is roughly equal to 1/15 of 1% of the federal budget. And so when you wonder what savings could be obtained from the Park Service by cutting these positions, it eludes me. But bigger than that, you look at the federal land management agencies, not just the Park Service, but the Forest Service, the BLM, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Reclamation. They steward our natural resources that reflect the strength of the country. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's a challenging job because of the wide variety of landscapes and forests and deserts and rivers and whatnot. The marine areas are just as valuable. And it seems short-sighted to me to chop away at those agencies that are protecting a large portion of our nation's wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would just add to that, every one of those agencies also is concerned with what they call cultural resources, not just the natural wealth of our country, but the cultural heritage as well, right? And so we always try to look at those two things in tandem at George Wright Society and see how supporting both can be synergistic. It's greater than the sum of the parts. But your point is, again, it's right. It's right on the money. These places are really, really important to who we are as a country, and they're important to people around the world, as not just tourism destinations, but as examples of, at their best, how a country can take care of its heritage, right? And so, yeah, cutting away at the agencies, like you just said, Kurt, is to to me, it's a false economy, and not just because they generate a lot of money, which they do. And I think you probably have more of the statistics at your fingertips than I do, but it's a lot of money that they generate. But you and I were chatting before we started the podcast about the concept of natural capital, ecosystem services, things that aren't really entered into a conventional economic system, and yet are immense goods that are provided by protected places like national parks, and they're very hard to quantify. But the reality is that those benefits are absolutely vital to the functioning of human civilization, right? So yeah, these are just immensely valuable places, and they need to be handled with care. Is kind of the bottom line.
As we touched on, it's very different times with the second Trump administration, and I've been around for a while. I think I'm in my seventh decade, and I can't recall another president wanting to insert his ideologies across the country. And what I'm getting at there is trying to erase members of our nation. We're not going to acknowledge transgender people. We took Jackie Robinson off of the Defense Department wall because he was black. Oh, that was a mistake. We're going to put him back. But we're seeing that going on across the country. Climate change is not to be spoken. A lot of erasing is going on. And I believe the George Wright Society is taking a step to protect some of that history of who we are. What can you tell me about that, the stewardship archive that you guys have created?
Yeah, you're mentioning it. It's a new project that we created called the Stewardship Archive, and this came about after the last election, the federal election in November. A group of people, long-term stalwarts, really, of the George Wright Society, got together and were contemplating what the change of administration might portend for parks and place-based conservation. And the previous Trump administration had a record of erasing things about climate change from federal websites and so on and so forth. And they had indicated in the campaign that there was animus towards those kind of topics, particularly towards certain groups of people like trans people, LGBTQ people, and so there seemed to us that in this little group a pretty strong likelihood that when the administration took office again, that they might go after what we were calling vulnerable topics, and things like climate change, and generally the history of historically underrepresented groups in our society. That's another topic. Diversity, equity, and inclusion activities, which we think in the George Wright Society as principles are really important. That's sort of a separate topic from DEI programs and employment programs, but as an overarching principle, we think that diversity, equity, and inclusion are critical to the functioning of our society. So that was a topic that we were concerned about. Anyway, long story short is we put together, we were able to get a small grant from a donor and put together a web capture project. And what that means is that we made up lists based on our own knowledge of these topics, and there were several people who had people on our volunteer team who had long histories with the agency, who really knew their stuff, and they thought, well, okay, this topic might be a target, this might be a target. And so we created lists of potentially vulnerable topics, and then we're able to engage the services of a couple of professional computer scientists, data scientists, who helped automate some of the web capturing process. So we literally went and downloaded all kinds of data on these topics. And by data, I mean things like HTML sites, websites, HTML files, PDF files, which are documents that underlie, some of the stuff that's on the web. In other words, substantive information about these particular topics. And so the thought there was that we would simply get these, put them onto hard drives, keep them as an archive, and then possibly they could be of use for people who want to know what may have changed when the new administration comes in. People might like to compare a before and after. Historians years from now who might want to be writing the history of this period, say, what was going on. The whole idea there was simply to provide a snapshot of what we were calling the federal agency state of knowledge and practice as it existed, before the new administration took office. And so we covered a bunch of different agencies. We covered the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, the NOAA National Marine Sanctuaries Program, Forest Service, a bit of the U.S. Geological Survey, Bureau of Reclamation. I think it was 7 or 8 agencies, but they're all agencies that have to do with protecting public lands and waters. And so we created this archive, and we have all this data. And if you've been following the news, you know that many other organizations have also been working on similar projects, particularly in the environmental health field, things like that. There's all kinds of people who are now archiving data. And of course, there are general programs like the Wayback Machine and the Internet Archive that just do that anyway. But we were interested in having a really focused set of data on these agencies, the land and ocean managing agencies on these topics. And so that's what we've done. And so we've got the material. And now it's a bit of a, grabbing a tiger by the tail. Now we have to figure out how to organize it. And so that's the next phase in the project that we are working on right now, which we'll need to get a little bit more funding to do, but actually indexing all this data so that we actually know exactly what we've got. And there's we're talking about tens of thousands of documents. So that's what we've gotten right now in the archive. And then we're working on, the next step is to actually figure out a way that people can know what's there and query the data. And so that's what we're planning for right now.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I think I read someplace that 3 terabytes of data.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of chat. I'll tell you, Kurt, I got an education in how in sort of data management and computer science, which is not my field, but these computer scientists that we work with are fabulous. And it's not a straightforward process, just grabbing data off the web, because you get a lot of extraneous material, things that are important for the functionality of how when you go to a website, you click something and something happens. There's all kinds of files and different things that make that work, but they're there to help support the functionality of the site. And we're interested mostly in the substance, like what are they saying about climate change, or what are they saying about whatever the topic is. And so there's 3 terabytes of data, but a much smaller portion of that will be actually substantive data. But it's still we're talking, as I say, like tens of thousands of quote unquote assets, different files that we need to organize. And we have a rough idea of we have a pretty good idea of what's there. It's just that we need to index it so that other people can possibly send us a request and say, hey, do you have the information on this topic from this agency? And we might be able to supply that, but that's down the road. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to make it available, or even if we need to make it available, maybe we'll just have it for posterity and wait and see if it's useful in the future. We haven't really totally decided that yet, but the main thing is we got the data and we got it in a timely fashion.
Yeah, is this an ongoing collection, or did you stop on January 19th?
Well, we did stop. This was done through January 19th, literally, because we wanted to have the snapshot be, what existed prior to the new administration. And so now we're potentially open to adding materials to this archive if there are things that people would like to see that they feel is vulnerable. But we haven't made any decisions about whether we have the capacity. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we're just a small organization. And so we're not really set up, to be serving out tons of requests for data. So we're kind of feeling our way here because we've never done anything like this before. But that's a possibility that we're contemplating.
Yeah, sounds like a fascinating project, and can't wait to see the final product as far as what you've captured and how to explore it. I was a history minor in college. It always fascinates me what's transpired in the world.
Yeah, well, I was a history major myself, so it's having a historical perspective helps in turbulent times. We were talking about that earlier in the podcast, and this is not the only turbulent time our country's gone through, and it can seem sort of apocalyptic sometimes, when you're like living through it, but it's a pretty resilient place we live in, so it helps to have a long view.
I hope you're right. I'm curious, Dave. You deal with a lot of scientists and researchers across the country in all aspects of theologies, as I like to call them. Leading up to the change in administrations, we had a series of stories on The Traveler, our Threatened and Endangered Parks series. We try and do this at the end of each year. Largely looking at climate change impacts or funding impacts or light pollution impacts. One of the stories that I did involved talking to people about the change in politics in Washington because President Trump is a lot different than President Biden, and there were a lot of concerns about what his return to Washington would mean for the scientific community. One of the individuals I interviewed for that story was Dr. Patrick Gonzalez, who worked for the Park Service, and then he worked, I believe, for President Biden's Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ. And he told me that one of his concerns was not only that the incoming administration would censor scientists, but that there would be a lot of self-censoring because scientists didn't want to stick their heads out there, stick their necks out there. In your dealings with the people who submit papers for the George Wright Society, has that topic ever come up? Are people scared to voice their opinions on science?
No, I can't say that I've had direct conversations with people who've expressed that to me. I hear that all the time, though, through our, just the connections, the network that we have. I have no doubt that there are at least some people who feel very constrained, and scientists, I think as a general class are not out there looking for controversy or headlines necessarily all the time. Mostly they want to pursue science, and anything that's considered sort of an externality or a political outside constraint is something that they'd rather not have to deal with. I think in general, I'm being very generalizing here, right? Obviously there are exceptions, but yeah, I think the whole notion that you're bringing up of self-censorship is a very real one. Again, especially if you're a scientist who works for the federal government, then when the new administration comes in, no matter who it is, ultimately your boss is the president, because that's how it works, right? So yeah, I think that there's a very real, I can't point to specific examples to give you, but I think there's a very real possibility that there'll be a lot of people who simply will try to lay low and maybe not do the particular kind of science that they would do normally or would have done, because they feel like it might put them in the crosshairs of someone who objects to whatever it is they're working on. So that can be a really insidious effect of a politically ideologically charged situation like we're in right now.
No, absolutely. And we've seen it a lot across the National Park Service, and it's unfortunate because the Park Service is great people doing hard work, doing valuable work, and they take a lot of pride in their work. And there's I think both censorship and self-censorship. Whenever we ask a question specific to that park, they have to float it by Washington. And I don't know what type of staff they have in the Park Service Communications Department in Washington, but I'm sure they're overworked and just can't handle the flurry of requests coming in across the country. But it's definitely some challenging times in reporting on what's going on in the park system and with the Park Service, unfortunately.
Oh, I know. I feel for you, Kurt. Because I read the Traveler, and I read. It seems like every story, you're asking for, a comment, and you don't get a response from whether it's WASO or individual parks, and that's where we're at right now in terms of the information ecosystem, so to speak. It's very, very constrained.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting times. Well, Dave, thanks so much for visiting with us today about the George Wright Society. I mean, I've known it for a long time, and I think it does need a spotlight cast on it because of the role that you guys provide in getting this information out about national parks, or conservation areas, not just the national park system, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure. Kurt, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and share. And let me just close by thanking you also for the work you're doing with the National Parks Traveler. It's vital. I hope everybody listening to this will support you because you're a must read for all of us here. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. So I hope both of our organizations thrive. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And hopefully I'll catch up with you in Montana later this year and we can discuss how far we've come.
Yeah, I hope to see you up there. That'd be great.
That's our show this week. I hope you enjoyed it. To learn more about the George Wright Society and peruse the rich collection of articles and studies on conservation and cultural topics, visit georgewrightsociety.org. And if you like what you see, consider a donation to help them with their mission. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.